Tonight, in the search for new clues, several of Nancy Guthrie's neighbors tell NBC News investigators returned this week, asking them about any potential internet issues the night of Nancy's disappearance. The homeowners say the agents told them several neighbors mentioned glitches with their internet that night. One of those neighbors tells us when they checked on their Ring cameras, this one here, the one closest to Nancy's property, said not available during the overnight hours of the abduction.
Here's the jammer. Hold it up here. You turn it on.
Security tech consultant Ted Nearhouse showed us how a Wi-Fi jammer can interfere with internet signal and home surveillance cameras.
And you will see it go out. So that's what it looks like. It'll say not available or something along those lines.
But Nearhouse says he's skeptical a Wi-Fi jammer was used in Nancy's abduction.
If they turned that thing on when they pulled up, you'd never have any video on any camera. So that's why I don't think anything was jammed.
Some online sleuths have pointed out it appears there could be something in the suspect's pocket. We asked the sheriff about that earlier this week.
Did he have a Wi-Fi jammer, a walkie-talkie? Have you been able to figure?
I've not looked at it that closely. But yeah, I know that my team has looked at it with the FBI, every angle.
He did everything right. Every single thing. He jammed the Wi-Fi signal, knocked out every camera on the block, disabled the home security system, and according to retired law enforcement analysis of the doorbell footage, he showed up carrying a device in his front pocket that wiped out the entire neighborhood's internet signal the moment he stepped close enough to the property. Think about that for a second. This was not some impulsive, reckless act. This was a calculated, methodical operation. The kind of preparation you only see in true crime documentaries when someone has spent serious time studying their target. He mapped the cameras. He studied the angles. He accounted for the neighbors, the timing, the entry, the exit. He worked through every scenario where something could go wrong, and he built a plan around all of them. And yet, one variable, one single assumption, something he was so convinced he had already handled that he never stopped to question it. He walked right past it, and in doing so, without knowing it, without even feeling it happen, he handed federal investigators the one thread they needed to pull this entire case wide open. Because what the FBI recovered, from a source he was 100% certain no longer existed, has his face on it, clear enough to publish, clear enough to put in front of millions of people across the United States and ask, do you know this man? His build is on it, his facial features, a distinctive mustache, eyebrows that multiple independent analysts flagged immediately as identifying characteristics, a ring on his pinky finger, and that device. The one sticking out of his front pocket on the night a 66-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home in Tucson, Arizona. That device may carry its own federal paper trail, one that does not disappear just because you think you covered your tracks. This is true crime. This is a real documentary playing out in real time in a real American neighborhood involving real federal investigators and a real woman whose family is still waiting for answers. He jammed the signal. He neutralized the cameras. He walked up to that front door like he had a plan for everything. He did not plan for the FBI to call Google. He did not plan for what Google still had, what was recovered, what it shows, and exactly where this investigation is heading because of that one miscalculation. That is what this video is about. And by the time we get to the end, you will understand not just what happened on the night of February 1st in Tucson. You will understand why this suspect, as careful and as calculated as he was, may have already made the one mistake that cost him everything. Stay with me. February 1st into the early morning hours of February 2nd, Tucson, Arizona. That is when Nancy Guthrie, a 66-year-old woman described by everyone who knew her as sharp, fiercely independent, and deeply connected to her family, vanished from her home. No signs of a violent struggle, no immediate explanation, just a woman who was there and then was not. What made this case different from the very first hours of the investigation was not just that she was gone. It was what our investigators found, or more accurately, what they could not find, when they started pulling the security footage from her street. Nancy had cameras, she had a security system, she had a Nest doorbell camera mounted at her front door. And her neighbors had cameras too. Ring doorbells, outdoor security setups, the kind of residential surveillance network that exists on virtually every block in suburban America today. The kind that in most missing persons cases gives investigators an immediate visual timeline to work from. Except this time, it did not work that way. When law enforcement began canvassing the neighborhood, going door to door, asking residents for any footage from that overnight window, A pattern started, emerging. One that investigators did not immediately announce publicly, but that would quietly become one of the most significant threads in this entire investigation. Multiple homeowners, multiple addresses, all reporting the same thing. Internet disruptions that night. Not one person on one street having a bad connection. Multiple residents spread across the same neighborhood, all experiencing connectivity issues during the same overnight window when Nancy Guthrie disappeared. In everyday life, you call that bad luck. In a federal true crime investigation, you call that a data point. And the more carefully investigators examined that data point, the clearer the picture became. What happened to the cameras on that street was not a coincidence, not a glitch, not a random outage. It was deliberate. The neighbor whose Ring camera was positioned closest to Nancy's home, the one camera that geographically should have captured the most useful footage, had its recording listed as something very specific during those overnight hours, not corrupted, not malfunctioning, not glitched, not available. That phrase matters more than it might seem on the surface. Ring cameras, when functioning normally and connected to Wi-Fi, stream and store footage directly to Amazon's cloud servers. When a Ring camera loses its internet connection, it loses the ability to upload anything. Depending on the device model, there may be limited local buffer storage. But without a consistent connection, that footage either never saves or overwrites itself quickly. Not available in the context of an active Ring camera on an active account, most often points to one specific conclusion. The camera was powered on, it was physically functioning, but it was not connected to the internet during the exact window and when it mattered most. Which brings investigators, and this documentary, to the question that has been sitting at the center of this case since the earliest days of the investigation. Why wasn't it connected? Someone or something made sure it wasn't. And that is where this case stops being a missing persons investigation and starts becoming something else entirely. To understand what investigators believe happened to those cameras, you need to understand how a Wi-Fi jammer works, and once you understand it, everything about that night in Tucson starts clicking into place in a way that is difficult to dismiss. A Wi-Fi jammer operates by broadcasting radio frequency interference across the same spectrum that Wi-Fi networks run on. Consumer Wi-Fi, the kind powering Ring cameras, Nest doorbells, and smart home security systems across every neighborhood in America, operates primarily on two frequency bands, 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. A jammer floods both of those bands simultaneously with noise, overwhelming every legitimate signal within its radius and making every connected device in range behave as though the internet simply does not exist. The radius of a consumer-grade jammer, the kind available online for under $100, can stretch from a few dozen feet to several hundred feet, depending on the device's output power and the surrounding environment. In an open residential neighborhood, a mid-grade jammer operating from a parked vehicle could realistically cover multiple properties at the same time. And here's the detail that makes this so operationally dangerous. The devices are completely silent, no sound, no visual alert, no warning of any kind. A Ring camera 2 doors down does not notify its owner that the signal has been jammed. It does not flash, it does not beep, it simply stops uploading. The homeowner asleep at 2 in the morning has absolutely no idea anything is wrong. They wake up the next day, open the app, and the footage window shows as unavailable. That is not a system failure. That is a designed outcome. And when you map the reports of multiple homeowners across that Tucson neighborhood, all experiencing internet disruptions during the same overnight window, that is not a coincidence. In forensic investigation terms, that is a geographic cluster, a cluster with a center point. And identifying that center point is precisely the kind of problem the FBI is built to solve. Now here's where this moves beyond theory and into federal territory. Wi-Fi jammers are not a legal gray area in the United States. They are flatly illegal under federal communications law, specifically under 47 U.S.C. Section 302A of the Communications Act. It is a federal violation to manufacture, import, market, sell, or operate a signal jamming device on American soil. The FCC enforces this statute aggressively, and it covers the entire chain. From the moment a device enters the country to the moment the power switch is flipped on. Alongside that, 47 CFR Part 15 prohibits the operation of any device that causes harmful interference to licensed communications. A Wi-Fi jammer causes that interference by design, every single time it is switched on. What that means for this investigation is significant. Every step of that jammer's journey, From the overseas manufacturer to the purchase platform, from the payment processor to the delivery address, from the account registration to the import documentation, is a federal record. And federal records do not vanish because a suspect assumed they would. They sit in servers and shipping databases, in financial transaction logs waiting for a subpoena. The FBI, through mutual legal assistance treaties, has the authority to compel records from international platforms. They can reach purchase histories on gray market websites. They can pull import documentation. In some cases, they can match device-specific identifiers back to an individual purchase if the physical device is ever recovered. Sheriff Nanos of the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed publicly that his team and the FBI have examined the jammer theory.
Tonight, in the search for new clues, several of Nancy Guthrie's neighbors tell NBC News investigators returned this week, asking them about any potential internet issues the night of Nancy's disappearance. The homeowners say the agents told them several neighbors mentioned glitches with their internet that night. One of those neighbors tells us when they checked on their Ring cameras, this one here, the one closest to Nancy's property, said not available during the overnight hours of the abduction.
Here's the jammer. Hold it up here. You turn it on.
Security tech consultant Ted Nearhouse showed us how a Wi-Fi jammer can interfere with internet signal and home surveillance cameras.
And you will see it go out. So that's what it looks like. It'll say not available or something along those lines.
But Nearhouse says he's skeptical a Wi-Fi jammer was used in Nancy's abduction.
If they turned that thing on when they pulled up, you'd never have any video on any camera. So that's why I don't think anything was jammed.
Some online sleuths have pointed out it appears there could be something in the suspect's pocket. We asked the sheriff about that earlier this week.
Did he have a Wi-Fi jammer, a walkie-talkie? Have you been able to figure?
I've not looked at it that closely. But yeah, I know that my team has looked at it with the FBI, every angle.
Every angle. That
His exact words, every angle. That is not a dismissal. That is a confirmation that this line of investigation is formally open, that federal resources are behind it, and that no one in law enforcement is walking away from it. The suspect may have believed that jamming the signal was the end of that particular problem. What he may not have accounted for is that the moment he potentially imported, purchased, and activated a federally prohibited device in a residential neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona, he may have created a paper trail that exists entirely outside of anything he could have jammed, destroyed, or erased. He neutralized the cameras. He did not neutralize the receipt. Now we get to the mistake. The one variable he got wrong. The one assumption he was so certain about that he never even thought to question it. And it is the reason that right now, in this true crime documentary, we are looking at his face. Let's reconstruct what investigators and former FBI analysts have publicly disclosed about Nancy Guthrie's home security setup. Because the details matter enormously here. Nancy had a Nest doorbell camera mounted at her front door, a Google Nest, the kind of device that when functioning and connected to the internet streams footage directly to Google's cloud servers. She had a security system, she had cameras. On paper, her home was monitored. Now here's how most people, including, it appears, the person who came to her door that night, understand how doorbell cameras work. The footage lives in two places, on the physical device itself and on whatever cloud platform the camera is connected to. If you destroy the physical device, the local copy is gone. If the internet was disrupted, say by a jammed Wi-Fi signal, the footage never uploaded to the cloud. So if you knock out the internet first and then deal with the physical camera, the footage is gone. Completely and permanently gone. That is a logical assumption. It is also wrong. What this suspect did not know is what most people do not know, is that Google's Nest infrastructure does not rely solely on the standard cloud sync pathway to retain data. There's another layer entirely, a backend layer. Residual data that exists within Google's server architecture independently of whether the homeowner has an active cloud subscription, independently of whether the camera was online during the recording window, and independently of whether the physical device is still mounted on the wall or has been removed entirely. The FBI, working directly with Google, recovered footage from exactly that layer. Not from the cloud subscription, not from the physical device, from residual backend data, traces embedded in Google's infrastructure that persist in ways that operate completely outside of what a user sees, what a user controls, and critically, what a suspect can anticipate or neutralize. And what that footage shows is not a blurry, unusable image. It is clear Clear enough that the FBI made the decision to release it publicly. Clear enough to put in front of millions of people across the United States and ask for help identifying the person in it. A male figure, adult, medium build, approaching Nancy Guthrie's front door in the dark, a visible mustache, distinct enough that it registers immediately as an identifying feature, eyebrows that multiple independent analysts, reviewing the footage separately and without coordinating their observations, flagged as notably distinctive, a pinky ring, jewelry on a specific finger, specific enough that it could potentially be matched to a purchase record or identified by anyone who has seen this person in their daily life. And protruding from his front pocket, clearly visible, an object with the profile of an external antenna, not flush with the fabric, not the flat rectangular outline of a smartphone, but something extending upward with the silhouette of a device built to transmit and receive signal. He walked up to that door believing he was invisible. He believed that between the disrupted Wi-Fi signal and whatever he did or did not do with the physical camera, he had neutralized the footage threat completely. He had not. The data survived in a layer of Google's backend infrastructure that he did not know existed. The FBI knew to ask for it. Google provided it. And now his face, his mustache, his eyebrows, his ring, and that antenna in his pocket has been seen by millions of people across this country. Former FBI supervisory special agent and criminal profiler Jim Clemente put it plainly when analyzing this case publicly. He was not prepared to deal with the door camera. He did not have tools in his hands to force his way into the house in the front. Sit with that for a moment, because that observation tells us something beyond just the footage itself. He came to that front door with empty hands. No forced entry tools, no crowbar, nothing that would signal aggression or intent to any camera that might still be capturing. He approached in a posture that looked, at least in silhouette, like an arrival, like someone who had a reason to be there. That means one of two things. Either he expected that front door to open because he knew Nancy well enough to believe she would open it for him, or he had been given enough specific intelligence about her routines, and her security setup that he believed approaching the front door without tools was a viable plan. Either way, that is not the behavior of a stranger operating on impulse. That is the behavior of someone who came to that door with a map, not a paper map, a knowledge map, built from familiarity, from surveillance, from information gathered about Nancy Guthrie before the night of February 1st. And the footage that was supposed to be gone forever is now the clearest evidence of exactly who was standing on her porch. He was good. He was not good enough. Let's talk about what is sticking out of his front pocket in that footage, because this detail, once you understand what it potentially means, reframes the entire operation that took place on the night of February 1st in Tucson. The first assumption most people made when the footage went public was simple. It is a phone. A smartphone partially pulled out of his pocket. Logical guess. Most people carry their phones that way. But investigators and analysts who examined that footage closely reached a different conclusion. The shape is wrong for a smartphone. The orientation is wrong. And retired Detective Lisa Miller, who analyzed the footage publicly, offered an assessment that shifts this case into a completely different dimension. Her conclusion: the antenna visible in the suspect's front pocket is not a phone. It is a small handheld radio, a two-way communication device, a walkie-talkie. And Detective Miller did not stop at the identification. She followed it directly to its logical implication. Her words: "It fits my theory that this suspect had an accomplice. Think about why that matters operationally. A cell phone makes sense for a solo operation. You can call, text, use data, communicate with anyone anywhere through a carrier network, but you do not bring a handheld two-way radio to a solo job. A walkie-talkie is short range. It is designed for real-time communication with someone physically nearby. It does not route through a cellular carrier, which means no carrier record, no digital log of the communication, no tower ping tying a conversation to a specific location and time. You bring a walkie-talkie when there is a second person close by, someone around the corner, someone in a vehicle, someone who needs to know in real time exactly what is happening at that front door, and someone whose presence you need to keep completely off the cellular network's radar." Detective Miller is not the only analyst who has raised the accomplice angle. It has surfaced consistently across independent reviews of this case. And when you think through the logistics of what the evidence suggests happened that night, the accomplice theory does not just make sense. It may be the only explanation that accounts for all the moving pieces simultaneously. Consider what was operationally required that night. Nancy Guthrie did not simply walk out of her home and disappear into thin air. Moving a person, particularly against their will, from inside a residence to a waiting vehicle without creating a visible disturbance detectable by any camera that might still be functioning, is a complex undertaking. It is significantly more manageable with two people than with one. One person handles the entry. One person manages the vehicle. One person is at the door while the other has eyes on the street. The radio ensures they are synchronized in real time. The person at the vehicle knows exactly when to be ready. The person at the door knows the moment the exit window is clear. If something unexpected happens, a neighbor's light comes on, a car turns down the street, they can communicate instantly and adjust. That level of coordination does not happen through text messages sent over a carrier network that federal investigators can subpoena. It happens over a two-way radio frequency that leaves no carrier log and no digital paper trail. But here's where the accomplice angle connects to something even deeper in this investigation. If a second person was involved, positioned at the vehicle on the other end of that radio, then the investigation does not have one subject. It has two. And a second subject means a second set of records, a second phone, a second location history, a second financial trail, a second circle of people who may know something. Secrets held by one person can be maintained indefinitely. Secrets shared between two people have a shelf life, and the FBI understands that better than anyone. There's also a third dimension to this that deserves direct attention, one that connects back to the knowledge question, because someone had to build the intelligence picture that made this operation possible. How did whoever planned this know the specific layout of Nancy's security system? Which neighbor's camera had the best angle on her property? What time window gave them the best operational cover? That level of detail does not come from driving past the house once. It does not come from a single reconnaissance pass through the neighborhood. Sometimes that kind of intelligence comes from a conversation, from someone who had been inside that home, from someone Nancy knew, someone she trusted, who at some point before the night of February 1st was quietly gathering information, without Nancy ever knowing that is what was happening. If there was an accomplice at the vehicle, there may also be a third layer entirely, someone who was never anywhere near that house on the night of February 1st, someone with no physical exposure to the scene, but someone who made the entire operation possible by providing the knowledge map that shaped every decision made that night. From the timing to the entry point to the specific camera that needed to be neutralized most urgently. 3 people, 3 separate threads, 3 separate sets of records, location histories, and potential points of failure in whatever version of events the people involved are telling themselves they can hold together indefinitely. The FBI does not investigate missing persons cases at the federal level because a case got attention online. They step in when the evidence suggests something that crosses a threshold local jurisdiction cannot adequately address alone. And when federal investigators are collaborating with Google to pull residual backend data, formally examining federal communications violations, and deploying behavioral analysis resources, they're not treating this as a local matter. They're pulling every thread, all 3 of them. Let's talk about what it actually takes to plan an operation at this level. Because the evidence does not point to someone who drove past Nancy Guthrie's house once, sized it up, and made a move. The evidence points to something that required time, observation, and accumulated intelligence gathered across multiple days or weeks before February 1st ever arrived. Think through the layers of specific knowledge that this operation required. First, the cameras. Not just that cameras existed on the street, but which specific camera covered which angle, which neighbor's device had the clearest line of sight to Nancy's property, and which devices needed to be neutralized most urgently. You do not learn that from a single drive-by. You learn that from repeated observation across different hours and different days, mapping the coverage gaps, identifying the blind spots, understanding the full surveillance picture of that block before you ever make a move. Second, the security system inside the home, the specific setup, what was active, what was not, and critically, whether Nancy's Nest doorbell camera had an active cloud storage subscription. That last detail is the kind of information that does not come from sitting in a car down the street. That comes from someone who had been inside that house, or from someone who had a direct line of communication to a person who had. Third data point, the overnight routine. When the lights go off, when the neighborhood goes quiet, when the window of vulnerability opens. That is not information you collect in a single observation. That is a pattern. and patterns require repeated exposure to establish. Fourth, the front door approach itself. Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Jim Clementoden flagged this specifically in his public analysis. Empty hands at the front door, no forced entry tools, an approach designed to look like an arrival, not a breach. That behavior only makes sense if the person at that door had a reasonable expectation that it would open without force being necessary. And that expectation requires knowing Nancy well enough, or having been given detailed enough intelligence about her to believe that approach was viable. 4 distinct layers of specific knowledge. Any single one of them in isolation could theoretically be a calculated guess. All 4 together, that is a knowledge map, built from familiarity, from surveillance, from information that someone spent real time collecting about Nancy Guthrie's life, her home, and her vulnerabilities before the night of February 1st. Which means that at some point prior to that night, someone was watching, and watching leaves traces. Not necessarily the cinematic kind, a figure standing outside with binoculars. Modern surveillance is far less visible than that. It is a vehicle parked down the block at different hours across the different days. It is multiple slow passes through a neighborhood at different times, building a timing profile of when the street goes dark. It is a conversation with someone who had legitimate access to Nancy and her home. A conversation that, from Nancy's perspective, was completely ordinary, but that was quietly building an intelligence picture she never knew was being constructed. And here's the forensic reality of that kind of prior surveillance activity in the United States in 2024. It leaves digital residue. Cell towers log the presence of devices in their coverage radius. License plate readers, mounted on police vehicles at intersections and parking structures across American cities, capture and timestamp every plate that passes through their field. Purchases at nearby businesses create timestamped transaction records tied to payment methods. A vehicle that appeared on that street or in that neighborhood across multiple prior dates did not move through invisibly. It passed through a grid of passive data collection and infrastructure that was recording its presence, whether anyone was paying attention at the time or not. The FBI does not need to have been watching before February 1st to access that data now. They need a subpoena. And the right question. Was this person or a vehicle connected to this person present in the vicinity of Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood in the days or weeks before February 1st? Is exactly the kind of question federal investigators ask when they are building a prior surveillance timeline. He may have been disciplined on the night of February 1st. The question investigators are working to answer is whether he exercised that same discipline on every visit before it. Because most people who conduct prior surveillance do not operate with the same level of caution they apply on the night of the actual event. The reconnaissance phase feels lower stakes. And lower stakes leads to lower caution, and lower caution leaves more traces. Now layer onto all of this the single most powerful forensic tool that may be in active use in this investigation right now, the geofence warrant. A geofence warrant, also called a reverse location search, allows federal investigators to compel major technology companies, primarily Google, to provide account data for every device present within a defined geographic boundary during a specific time window. In practical terms, the FBI can draw a digital perimeter around Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood and request from Google the account identifiers for every device linked to a Google service, Google Maps, Gmail, Android operating systems, any Google-connected application that was physically inside that boundary on the night of February 1st. Every smartphone with a Google account that was in that neighborhood that night is a data point. And if 2 or more of those devices can be connected to the same individual, or to people with documented relationships to each other or to prior co-location at other significant addresses, that connection becomes evidence in a federal investigation. This is not theoretical technology. Geofence warrants have produced convictions in federal cases across the United States. The legal framework for their use in federal kidnapping investigations is established, and the data they pull from does not expire because a suspect left the neighborhood. It sits in Google's infrastructure preserved, waiting for the legal process that compels its disclosure. The person at the door may have had the operational discipline to leave his personal phone at home that night. He may have been carrying a device specifically chosen to avoid cellular carrier detection, but the person in the vehicle, the one on the other end of that radio, may not have exercised the same level of precaution. And if their device was present in that neighborhood on February 1st, and their account history places them in proximity to the suspect across prior dates and locations. That connection is not gone. It is documented, it is preserved, and it is accessible through the exact same legal mechanisms the FBI used to pull residual footage from Google's backend infrastructure. He thought carefully about what he carried to that door. He may not have thought carefully enough about what the person waiting down the street was carrying in their pocket. When the FBI makes the decision to release surveillance footage to the public and ask for identification assistance, that decision is not made casually. It is a calculated investigative move. And what it signals is specific. The footage is clear enough, and the features visible in it are distinctive enough that federal investigators believe someone watching will recognize the person in it, not through facial recognition software, not through forensic reconstruction, through something far more powerful than either of those tools, a human being who has seen that face before. In their neighborhood, at their job, in their family, in their social circle, someone who looks at that footage and does not see a stranger. So let's go through exactly what is visible in that footage, because the details matter. And each one of them narrows the field significantly. The mustache. In the context of physical identification, a mustache is not a minor characteristic. It is a deliberate grooming choice that the people in this person's life have seen consistently across days, weeks, and months. Friends recognize it, family members recognize it, coworkers and neighbors recognize it. It is not something that blends into a crowd or gets forgotten in passing. The people who know this man will see that mustache in the footage and place it immediately. The eyebrows. Multiple independent analysts, reviewing this footage separately without coordinating their observations, arrived at the same conclusion about the eyebrows visible in that footage. They are notable. They are a distinguishing characteristic. When separate observers examining the same evidence converge on the same feature without any coordination between them, that convergence carries real investigative weight. The eyebrows in that footage will be remembered by anyone who has spent time around this person's face. The build. Adult male, medium frame. On its own, the broadest descriptor in the composite, but in combination with the mustache, the eyebrows, the ring, and the device, it contributes to a complete physical picture that is specific enough to identify. And then the ring. The pinky ring. This is potentially the most traceable physical detail in the footage outside of the face itself. People who wear rings, particularly on specific fingers, particularly rings distinctive enough to be noticed, wear them consistently. It is a habit, a personal statement, a daily choice that the people around them register and remember. A pinky ring is not standard everyday jewelry for most people. It is specific. It is chosen. And the people in this man's life will remember seeing it on him regularly. Beyond recognition, jewelry is traceable. Custom rings, rings purchased from specific retailers, rings ordered through online marketplaces. They leave purchase records. They leave seller histories. If the design visible in this footage is distinctive enough for forensic image analysts to work with, there is a pathway from that ring to a transaction. From that transaction to a name. He walked into the frame of that camera wearing his jewelry, carrying his features, with a device in his pocket that federal investigators are actively working to trace. He believed none of it would matter because he believed the footage no longer existed. It existed. It still exists. And now it has been seen by millions of people across the United States. So where does this investigation stand right now? The footage is in federal hands and in the public domain simultaneously. The FBI has the full recovered material from Google's backend infrastructure. The public has the released version. Both are actively being processed, one forensically, one through the collective recognition of millions of people who have now seen that face. The Wi-Fi disruption pattern across that Tucson neighborhood is an established fact of this investigation. Multiple homeowners confirmed it. The FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department have formally examined the jammer theory. Whether a federally prohibited device was purchased and used, and whether that purchase trail is actively being pursued through subpoenas, import records, and payment processing data, is not something investigators will announce publicly until they are ready to act on it. But the investigation is live. The legal framework is in place, and the federal tools available to pursue that trail go far beyond anything the suspect likely anticipated when he believed that knocking out the signal was the end of that particular problem. The accomplice angle is a formal part of this investigation. If a second person was at that vehicle, on the other end of that radio, or in the background providing the intelligence that shaped this operation, there's a second subject, a second set of records, a second location history, a second circle of people who know something, and potentially a third layer. Someone who never came near that house but made the entire operation possible by supplying the knowledge map that guided every decision made that night. The geofence data exists in Google's infrastructure, preserved and accessible through the same legal mechanisms that recovered the footage. The cell tower records from that neighborhood on the night of February first exist in carrier databases. The license plate reader data from the surrounding streets and intersections exists in law enforcement systems. The prior surveillance activity that had to have taken place before February 1st left. Digital traces across a grid of passive data collection infrastructure that was recording whether anyone was paying attention at the time or not. He planned carefully. He executed methodically. He accounted for more variables than most people in a true crime documentary ever account for. And he still left a thread. One wrong assumption about a layer of Google's backend architecture that he did not know existed. One assumption that the footage was gone. It was not gone. And that single miscalculation is now the center of one of the most technically sophisticated federal investigations currently active in the United States. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since the early hours of February 2nd out of Tucson, Arizona. Her family is still waiting. The investigation is still moving. No arrests have been announced. But the picture of what happened that night, and who is responsible for it, is getting sharper with every thread the FBI pulls. If you're watching this and that face means something to you. The mustache, the eyebrows, the pinky ring, that antenna in his pocket. The FBI Tucson field office is actively taking tips right now. The number is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Tips can also be submitted anonymously online at tips.fbi.gov. A reward has been announced, and information that leads to Nancy, or to the confirmed identification of this suspect, carries real value. He made one mistake. One assumption he was certain enough about that he never stopped to question it, and in every true crime case that ultimately breaks, it is never the thing investigators could not figure out that closes it. It is always the thing the suspect was most convinced he had already handled. He handled the cameras, he handled the signal, he handled the approach. He did not handle the back end, and now his face is everywhere.